My name is Victoria Knauf, and today I will draw for you the life of ramen noodles and how they came to transform from this traditional innocent bowl of noodles into what New York foodies like to call the ramen burger. Please don't expect beautiful drawings, but do expect an explanation of the context of ramen noodles in a remix culture. So for hundreds of years, the Italians, the Chinese, and the Arabs were fighting over who invented the noodle. And then finally, in 2005, archaeologist Liu and his colleagues found a pot of thin noodles that had been preserved for 4,000 years in Yellow River Slit. This suggested that people were eating noodles at least 1,000 years earlier than previously thought, and the Chinese had won the game. After China had been defeated in the Sino-Japanese War from 1894 to 1895, an increasing number of impoverished Chinese students came to Japan, and they were hungry. So it was soon after that Chinese stalls selling cheap Chinese staple foods were opened on the streets. And the thing they most commonly sold was, well, the obvious. But they weren't called noodles yet, and they weren't called ramen either. The Japanese called them shina soba, from the Japanese words for China, and buckwheat noodles, although they weren't actually selling buckwheat noodles, but that was the only thing the Japanese were familiar with at that time. The first man to actually bring the term ramen to the noodles was a Chinese chef who had fled the Russian Revolution and was now working at a restaurant in Japan. These days, foreign culture was often introduced by immigrants. Today, the influence of the internet plays a much bigger role, but we'll come back to that later. Japanese noodles were actually developed based on modified Chinese handmade noodle making techniques to meet the tastes of local people, so they were a fusion food from early on. So he called his noodles ramen, coming from the Chinese words la and mian. La simply meaning to pull, and mian noodles. 10 years after the war, the so-called Japanese miracle began. People's living standards and their income were rising. And with it, their diet was sort of changing as well. Oily dishes such as stir-fries, deep-fried food, and Western creamy soups began replacing the lean traditional staples of rice, vegetables, and fat-free dried goods. And this change inspired this young man, Ando Momofuku, to set up a laboratory and find a way to make an easy, high-calorie, and quick version of Chinese noodles. His final result was chicken ramen, that hit the market in 1958 and was just the right staple food for the new Japanese working population and all the students that were coming in. As TV started becoming very popular in Japan around the same time, Ando took advantage of it by promoting his new product heavily in TV advertising. And within the first year, an astonishing amount of 13 million packages were sold. Ramen then became the generic term for all Chinese-style soup noodles. And today, the Oxford Dictionary refers to ramen as quick cooking noodles, typically served in a broth with meat and vegetables. So, how on earth Do noodles and Asian cybercultures connect, you may well ask? Well, this is where this guy comes into play. He's called Lev Manovich. And he's a popular author of books on new media theory. He introduced the concept of remixable culture, when in the past communication meant simply one message going from a sender to a receiver. Today's messages to Manovich get inspired and distorted and mixed along the way until they get to the receiver. We learnt about this concept called remixability, applying to fashion and music, and all terms of user-generated content on social networks. And yes, noodles can be a part of exactly this user-generated content. I'll tell you how. Through blogs, social media, platforms like Pinterest, or even this very platform YouTube, wannabe chefs can share their recipes and cooking ideas with each other around the globe. Ramen noodles were what Bin Xiaofu in 2007 called an international food product from their very beginnings. For example, Ando Momofuku was using American surplus wheat and its advantages to make his instant noodles. And the Japanese in the very beginning revolutionized the traditional hand-making noodle techniques of kneading and pulling the dough with their new efficient machines. Tofu, it is and was necessary for noodles to be modified due to regional eating habits, taste preference, and advances in technology. Now, what makes us take a staple food like ramen out of its traditional context and remix it with our Western culture these days? Okumura Ayao, author of the article Japan's Ramen Romance in 2001, was teaching food culture at Japanese universities and once surveyed her class of 151 female students on what kinds of noodles they like best. Italian pasta, mostly spaghetti, had the most votes, followed by udon on second and ramen on third. Now, when she was asking this question to male students only, ramen was actually voted number 1, and spaghetti only came third. Ayao then suggested that women tend to prefer Italian pasta as it is fashionable, whereas men see ramen as a better investment in terms of serving volume. Now, how does this apply to the internet? Well, although I don't really have any statistics on this at all, and I'm sort of just guessing it, I would dare to suggest that the majority of today's food bloggers and recipe sharers and people who are crazy about food on the internet are, in a lot of the cases at least, well, women. Bringing in Ayao's theory, Asian-style noodles such as ramen would appear to Western women as they are foreign and fashionable. Asian food culture is often perceived by us as healthy, fresh, and simple. It is, though, also very foreign to Western taste buds, which explain weird concoctions such as ramen shepherd's pie, ramen burgers, or even a ramen pizza. All these are original recipes contributed by internet users which have used traditional Asian staple foods to make staple foods they are familiar with. After all, do ramen noodles themselves really care? While chefs all over the world may cringe at the thought of all these too weird foods, and many of them are met on the internet with either sheer excitement or sheer disgust, ramen noodles themselves probably don't mind. After all, it is thanks to constant remixing that they gained the world popularity they have today.